Does my wife have the right to make a claim against me if I cheated on her with the wife of the man she cheated on me with? My name's Ryan, and if you'd told me a year ago that my life would turn into a web of betrayals and bad decisions worthy of a soap opera, I'd have laughed it off. But here I am, sitting in my empty kitchen at 2 in the morning, replaying everything that's happened, wondering where it all went wrong, or if it was ever right to begin with. Emily and I had been married for 8 years. From the outside, we looked like the ideal suburban couple. We had the house with the white picket fence, weekend barbecues with friends, and a schedule packed with soccer games and PTA meetings. Our closest friends, Greg and Sarah, were the same way, always smiling, always together. The four of us were inseparable. Game nights, double dates, family vacations, you name it, we did it together. Greg was the guy I could call at 2 a.m. if my car broke down, and Sarah? Well, Sarah was like a sister. Or at least, that's what I thought. It all started about 6 months ago. Emily had been acting off. At first, I chalked it up to stress. She'd picked up more hours at work, and we'd both been busy juggling life. But then there were the late-night work calls, the sudden need to check her phone the second it buzzed, and the way she seemed to drift away when we were alone together. One night, curiosity, or maybe something darker, got the better of me. While Emily was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I wasn't proud of it, but something about the way she'd been acting made me feel like I had no choice. And that's when I saw them. Texts from Greg. Not just friendly messages either. These were the kind of texts you'd expect from teenagers in a bad romance movie. Inside jokes I didn't understand, flirty emojis, and messages about the other night. My stomach dropped. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I put the phone back where I found it and sat there, staring at the bathroom door, listening to the sound of the water running. When Emily finally came out, towel drying her hair like nothing was wrong, I didn't say a word. How could I? My mind was racing. Was this really happening? The next few days were a blur. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I started watching. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she left the room, I felt the weight of those texts pressing down on me. That's when I noticed something strange about Greg and Sarah. Sarah seemed distant. She wasn't her usual bubbly self, and I couldn't help but wonder if she knew. So one evening, while Emily and Greg were chatting in the kitchen during one of our usual double dates, I found a moment to talk to Sarah alone. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the kitchen. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. You just seem off lately," I said, trying to sound casual. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she was going to brush me off. But then, she said something that stopped me cold. "Ryan, do you ever feel like something's not right with them?" My heart was pounding now. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the kitchen again, lowering her voice. "I've had this feeling lately. Like Greg's keeping something from me. And the way he's been around Emily." There it was. The confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. "Sarah," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I think we need to talk." Sarah and I sat on the porch that night, away from the laughter and clinking glasses inside. The summer air was thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath for what was about to come. My hands were clammy, and Sarah was nervously twisting the ring on her finger. "You first," she said finally, breaking the silence. I hesitated, staring out into the darkened street. "I think Emily and Greg are having an affair." The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. For a moment, Sarah just stared at me, her face a mix of shock and something else, relief, maybe? "I thought I was going crazy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been seeing little things, texts, the way he smiles at her. I even caught him lying about where he was one night, but I didn't want to believe it." Hearing her say it out loud made everything feel more real. There was no denying it anymore. We sat there for what felt like hours, trading observations, piecing together a timeline of deceit. Every detail, every suspicion we'd brushed off, suddenly made sense. By the end of it, we were left staring at each other, two broken people trying to figure out what to do next. "I don't know about you," Sarah said, her voice hardening, "but I'm not just going to sit here and let them get away with this." I nodded, my own anger simmering beneath the surface. "They think they're so clever, sneaking around right under our noses. Let's see how clever they are when we turn the tables." At first, the plan was simple: expose them. Catch them red-handed and confront them with undeniable proof. But the more we talked, the more our anger morphed into something darker. Revenge. Sarah suggested we start by monitoring their movements more closely. I wasn't thrilled about playing amateur detective, but it felt like the only way to get the truth. Over the next few weeks, we became experts at pretending everything was fine while secretly gathering evidence. Greg started working late more often, and Emily's girls' nights became increasingly frequent. It wasn't hard to figure out where they were going. One evening, Sarah and I followed them to a quiet restaurant on the other side of town. We parked across the street and watched as they walked in together, laughing and leaning into each other like a couple of love-struck teenagers. Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "They're not even trying to hide it," she spat. Seeing it with my own eyes was like a punch to the gut. Part of me had still been holding on to hope that it wasn't true, that there was some innocent explanation. But there was no mistaking what we were seeing. That night, after they left the restaurant, we followed them again, this time to a cheap motel. My stomach churned as we watched them disappear inside. I felt like I was going to be sick, but Sarah's voice snapped me out of it. "They think they're untouchable," she said, her eyes blazing with fury. "Well, they're about to learn otherwise." I didn't know what she had in mind, but I could tell she wasn't going to back down. And honestly, neither was I. The days after that night felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. Sarah and I were bound by this shared mission, and though it was born out of pain, it was oddly comforting to have someone who understood exactly what I was going through. Late one night, we met up at Sarah's house to finalize our plan. Greg was working late again, at least, that's what he'd told her, and Emily was visiting her sister. The irony of their terrible excuses almost made me laugh, but there was no humor left in this situation. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Sarah said, pacing her living room. "If we just confront them, they'll deny it, or worse, try to turn it around on us. We need proof. And not just for us, for everyone." She was right. If we were going to do this, we needed to make it impossible for them to worm their way out. So, we set up hidden cameras. One in Greg's car, another in the motel parking lot where they thought they were safe, and one in Sarah's house, just in case they got bold enough to bring their affair closer to home. It felt invasive, wrong even, but at this point, all I cared about was exposing the truth. A week later, we had everything we needed. The footage was undeniable. Emily and Greg, holding hands in the car, laughing together at the motel entrance. And the worst of it, a clip of them kissing in Greg's living room while Sarah was out running errands. Watching it felt like ripping off a bandage only to find the wound had festered. Sarah sat beside me, her face pale, her hands trembling as she gripped her wine glass. "They didn't just betray us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They mocked us. Right here. In my own home." The rage in her voice matched the storm brewing inside me. "They deserve everything that's coming to them." But then, something shifted between us. As the night wore on and we sifted through the footage, our shared pain turned into something else. Sarah leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. Her warmth was disarming. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger, comfort, connection. I turned to look at her, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't planned, and it certainly wasn't smart, but in that moment, it felt inevitable. Like all the hurt and betrayal had led us to this. When we finally pulled away, reality hit like a freight train. "We can't," I started, but my voice trailed off. Sarah shook her head, her eyes glistening. I know. It's just. I don't know how to feel anymore. Neither did I. All I knew was that nothing in my life felt certain anymore, except for this. Emily and Greg weren't the only ones crossing lines. The next morning, I woke up in Sarah's guest room with a pit in my stomach. I hadn't gone home. I hadn't called Emily. I didn't even know what I would have said if I had. As I drove home, the weight of what had happened between Sarah and me settled in. We'd been so focused on catching our spouses in their betrayal that we hadn't realized how easily we could fall into the same trap. But even as guilt clawed at me, part of me didn't regret it. Being with Sarah had felt right, in a way I hadn't expected. And that scared me more than anything. Over the next few days, things between Sarah and me became complicated, an understatement if there ever was one. We both knew what we'd done crossed a line, but the pull we felt toward each other didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. We agreed to stay focused on the plan. Whatever was happening between us would have to wait until we confronted Emily and Greg. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Sarah and I decided that the best way to expose them was during one of our regular double dates. It felt poetic in a twisted way, letting them think everything was fine right up until the moment their world came crashing down. The night of the confrontation, Emily dressed up more than usual. She came downstairs in a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled, and greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. It took everything in me not to flinch. You look beautiful, I said, forcing a smile. Thanks, babe, she replied, oblivious. It's been a while since we all had dinner together. This'll be fun. Fun wasn't the word I'd use. When we arrived at Greg and Sarah's house, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Greg greeted us with his usual grin, but I noticed his eyes lingered a little too long on Emily. Sarah, meanwhile, avoided his touch entirely, brushing past him as she welcomed us inside. We made small talk over dinner, each of us playing our roles perfectly. Emily and Greg laughed at inside jokes, Sarah kept the wine flowing, and I nodded along like I wasn't seconds away from flipping the table. Finally, as dessert was being served, Sarah cleared her throat. You know, she began, her voice steady but sharp, I've been thinking about how much trust it takes to have close friends. It's like, you have to believe they'd never do anything to hurt you. Greg froze, his fork hovering midair. Emily glanced at me, her brow furrowed. Yeah, Greg said with a nervous chuckle. Of course. That's good to know, Sarah said, standing up. She walked to the corner of the room where her laptop sat and opened it. Because I'd hate to think what would happen if that trust was broken. She pressed a button, and the TV lit up with the footage we'd gathered. The room went silent. On the screen, Emily and Greg were in Greg's car, laughing and holding hands. Then, the clip shifted to the two of them kissing in the motel parking lot. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Greg turned as white as a sheet. What the hell is this? Emily stammered, looking at me. It's exactly what it looks like, I said, my voice cold. Greg stood abruptly. You went through my stuff? You've been spying on me? Spying? Sarah spat, her voice rising. You're lucky I didn't do worse. Do you have any idea what it feels like to see your husband and your best friend sneaking around like this? Emily started crying, her face buried in her hands. Ryan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. How long has it been going on? Weeks? Months? She didn't answer, and that silence was all the confirmation I needed. Greg tried to calm Sarah down, but she wasn't having it. You don't get to talk your way out of this, Greg. You and Emily ruined everything. The confrontation spiraled into chaos, accusations flying across the room. Emily begged me to listen to her, but I couldn't stand to hear another word. Then, Greg said something that stopped everyone cold. What about you two? He yelled, pointing between Sarah and me. You think I don't see what's going on here? You're both so quick to judge us, but you're not exactly innocent either. The room went silent again. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, and I could see the panic in her eyes. Emily turned to me, her tear-streaked face twisted in confusion and hurt. "What is he talking about, Ryan?" Emily's question hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Sarah and I didn't answer right away, and that silence said more than words ever could. Greg smirked, leaning back in his chair. "That's what I thought. You two have been playing your own little game, haven't you?" Emily's eyes darted between me and Sarah, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Ryan, tell me he's lying." I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. How could I explain what had happened? How could I tell her that her betrayal had driven me straight into Sarah's arms, and that part of me didn't even regret it? "Ryan," Emily's voice cracked, her hands trembling. "Please." I sighed, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "It's true," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it didn't start the way you think." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm. "Greg, don't act like this makes you a victim. Ryan and I didn't set out to hurt anyone. We were hurting, and we leaned on each other. That's more than I can say for what you and Emily did." Greg's smug expression faltered, but Emily's hurt only deepened. "So this is your excuse?" Emily shot back, her voice rising. "I cheated, so you thought it was fair game to do the same? Do you have any idea how much worse this makes everything?" "Worse?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with someone I trusted. You don't get to play the victim here, Emily. You broke us long before I made any mistakes." The argument spiraled from there, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Sarah tried to defend herself, but Greg cut her off, his own bitterness spilling out. "You're not innocent, Sarah," he spat. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't try to pretend otherwise." Finally, Sarah had enough. "You know what, Greg? I'm done." Her voice cracked, but her determination didn't waver. "Done with the lies, the games, and pretending we had something worth saving. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." With that, she turned to me. "Ryan, I think it's time we left." I hesitated, glancing at Emily one last time. Her face was a mixture of anger and heartbreak, but she didn't say a word. Sarah and I walked out together, leaving Greg and Emily behind in their shattered world. The weeks that followed were messy, to say the least. Emily and I officially separated, and divorce papers weren't far behind. Greg and Sarah did the same. Sarah and I didn't rush into anything after that. We needed time to process everything, to figure out if what we had was real or just a product of our shared pain. But as the dust settled, it became clear that what we'd found in each other wasn't just a fling or a distraction. It wasn't easy. Trust had been broken in every direction, and we both carried scars from the wreckage of our marriages. But slowly, we started to rebuild, not just our lives, but something new together. Do I regret how it all went down? Sometimes. The pain we caused, the mess we created, it wasn't worth the satisfaction of revenge. But at the same time, I can't ignore what came out of it. Sarah and I found something neither of us expected: hope. It's ironic, really. The same betrayal that tore everything apart also brought us together. Life's funny like that, isn't it? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.